Recording is live. We are continuing the protagonist swaps involving the Space Marines and Halo, with this one, I believe, being the Halo 5. What's the team called? Osiris team?
Fire Team Osiris
I was
in
close.
Space Marine 2. And you got either close. You could have said Spartan Fire Team, and that would have been acceptable. Um, I mean, to be fair, like I don't think they ever tell you what the name of Titus's squad is, so I just call them Titus Squad, even though they have two different squads between the games. Um, but yeah, this is the last one because there are only like two squad-based games in Space Marine in the Space Marine franchise and two in Halo. So this will have one more stream following it where I discuss claims that I made with the scan, so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So in this one, we're having Fireteam Osiris get swapped in right when they're about to jump off of their Pelican at the beginning of Halo 5. They just get yeeted out of their universe into the Space Marines universe in the first mission, well, technically the second mission in Skyfire. I'm skipping the tutorial mission technically because the tutorial mission is like not only not replayable, the first one on Kadaku, it's also not like where the main squad shows up because it's only Titus that shows up there, and his whole like Death Watch squad is basically dead. He only starts as the Ultramarines in the second mission. As usual, it's a protagonist swap, which means they get all the physical stats of the character. Any of their existing power armor has the same stats as the power armors in the series. Mjolnir is just as strong as Astartes armor, no stronger, no weaker. And then whatever if they have any conjoining tech that services the same function, like Iron Halo's shields, they're the same strength. Functions and physiologies are not changed, though. So, like, again, I'm not allowed to give the Spartans the multi-lung or the Belcher's glands. I'm not allowed to give them an Auspex unless they pick it up in the field. They don't get to start with it. And they obviously are given their default like loadouts. For the Spartans of Noble Team, I gave them two primary weapons and a sidearm, because in the games they have usually enough space for two primary weapons and a sidearm. Plus, Spartans have mag grips on their armor, so they could just grip a pistol to their side and then just put one rifle on the back and one in their arms. So, for all of the Fireteam Osiris, I believe they actually tell you what the default loadout for the rest of them is. Most of them have magnums between like Tanaka, Locke, and Buck. Olivia Vale is the only one among them that has a plasma pistol, and I guess she also has an SMG. Tanaka has a DMR, Locke has a battle rifle, and Buck has a assault rifle. So for their secondary weapons, I'm going to give them equipment and stuff that is normally available to them, as they are Spartan 4s aboard the UNSC Infinity. They basically get access to like a wide variety of weapons, not just anything from the UNSC, but also tech from the Covenant and Forerunners, because they also have Swords of St. Helios troops on board the Infinity at all times. So that would be why they have Covenant tech. Plus, Vale literally has a plasma pistol she carries around her at all times. It's not just because she's a diplomat, it's because they have that tech in spades. So I will give Buck probably like a rocket launcher. I'll give Tanaka a shotgun. I'll give Vale a storm rifle, and then I'll either give Locke like some other human weapon, or maybe like a light rifle. But it doesn't really matter. Either way, this is a shooter protagonist swap scenario, so they obviously have to watch their ammo. They get as many magazines as their maximum ammo can carry. plus several of each of grenades. For them, they will only have, I think, 3 plasmas, 3 frags. Nothing beyond that. No Promethean splinter grenades. And much like the shooter scenarios, normally there are weapon deposits that are littered throughout the maps where characters would normally get stuff. Um, in the case of Space Marine 1 and 2, there are already ammo deposits literally everywhere, and there are way too many of them in Space Marine 2. To be quite honest, like there's 3 or 4, sometimes 5 every single level. So I can't hope to replace all of them. I was only going to put like 3 or 4, as is per the scenario. So we're just going to keep the 3 or 4, and then we'll assume those other like 3 or 4 of these weapon detachments replace some of the ones in the missions. So there will be one in like Severance, probably a few on Alvarax, and then a few on Demirium. That'll be it. They can pick up any weapons that they see in the field, but their ultimate goal is just to kill the enemy. In the case of this mission, it is to basically find the Archmagos and well, not just extract him, but also extract like what is it called? You have to extract the Imperial Guardsman forces off the planet, or at least help them extract them off the planet by fighting off the Tyranids. Also, they got to fight Tyranids, so then you're gonna have to control yourself.
Dang. Why you do this to me?
Yeah, control your Tyranid racism.
It's justified.
So, technically, the objectives switch a little bit between mission to mission. They'll be on the first one, but after every mission, I think they technically relocate back to the battle barge because they usually have to take a ship back up to the Space Marine fleet. That's also the major difference between this and like much like Halo 5 scenario, but different from Space Marine 1 and Halo Reach. Those first 2 games don't have you reconvening with the fleets. Titus never goes back up off the surface to hang out or restock with any of the Ultramarines. That never happens. He's on Gaia for the entire scenario. Noble Team, while they do regroup at like Sword Base, they never go back up to like a carrier or a fleet or anything like that. Whereas in Space Marine 2, you do go back and talk to the people on the battle barge. So between missions, they could get restocked, not with their weapons, honestly. There's the Space Marine weapons and the weapons and tools that they have, and maybe get their armor repaired, though they probably have to give them Space Marine power armor. Most likely a smaller fit size. Which I'm not sure how that's going to work out, because technically, while they are similar in size to the Space Marines, they're not as wide as the Space Marines, as you guys might have noticed. Especially, well, we'll go ahead.
No, I was gonna say they are a tad bit smaller, yes.
Especially if we're considering the characters during Halo 5, because the Halo 5 characters have Gen 2 exoskeletons on their Mark 6 armor, and Gen 2's exoskeleton is a modular system that's meant for like high mobility, and all the attachments are meant for like high speed and stuff, so they take off like a bunch of extra things that would weigh the armor down. So they're as limber as possible. So it's a little bit closer to their actual size. Anyway, I think that's mostly everything, so we can get into the scenario now. I guess they start in like Skyfire, so they just have to go through the swamps of Kadaku first off, and they just fight like a bunch of Tyranids. If I remember correctly, in this first mission, you actually fight a Lictor, and you fight like a ton of Tyranids as well. So for fighting the Tyranids, as usual, when Fireteam Osiris is deployed into the scenario, they're gonna like not know anything about what the fuck the Tyranids are. They're not even gonna really understand where they are. until they make contact with the Ultramarines. Or at least, uh, what's his face? Locke will. The rest of the team won't, but I'll explain why that is. So they're going to jump out of their little ship after we, as the omniscient narrator, basically tells them, "You've been put in this universe. You can come back to the UNSC after you accomplish your goal, and this will solving this scenario will give you the I don't know the fruits of labors needed to save the UNSC from its impending demise or some bullshit. Also, if you don't do this, we'll kill you or something." Well, you just threaten them, as is usually the case in the protagonist swap. So they'll jump out the ship. Oh, go ahead.
No, no, as you do, just casually threatening these people to do what we want.
Yep. Yeah, nothing like good old coercion. But basically, we just tell them, like, this is what you need to go and do. So, therefore, you got to go do it. Like, go to this mission on Kodaku. And then they would just, they basically just fly down to the planet with their existing ships and then just make their way through the forest. Now, when they first come into contact with the Tyranids, they're not going to know what they are, other than the fact that they're just hostile aliens. And I think after a good few encounters with them, after shooting enough of them, they're going to start realizing that they seem to act very similarly to one another, in the sense that they all just seem to seek out the same thing, like a hive, or at least like a pack. So they're probably going to assume on intuition and basic observation alone that these are just not like they're a team based alien race. I don't think they're going to know that they're a collective until they run into the guardsmen on Kodaku, and Kodaku explain what the Tyranids are, because they're just like, "Oh, you must be the Guardsman Legion," and they're like, "Oh yeah, what are these fucking Tyranids?" And the guardsmen are like, "Oh boy, pull up a chair." Um, as far as the Tyranids themselves, some people might be asking, like, do they have the strength to kill the Tyranids and fight them? The answer, yes. Literally everybody does. So the Tyranids are not like super special when it comes to their stats. Most of the basic ones can technically be killed by like basic humans, like the what is it? Hang on, the Hormigons, which are like the smallest ones with the little claws, like your default Tyranid. The Termagons, which are just Hormigons that have guns, that fire like corrosive shots at you. And then there are bigger ones like the Tyranid Warriors, the Raveners, the Lictors, the Gargoyles, and the Zoranthropes. And then eventually the Carnifexes. In this game, they're only going to have to fight Tyranid Warriors, Raveners, Hormigons, Termagons, Carnifexes, Zoranthropes, and Lictors, as well as Gargoyles. They are not going to have to fight the Hive Tyrant. I know the Hive Tyrant is in the game, where anyone's like, he's in the game. No, no, you don't have to fight him. He is in the side missions. He is fought by a completely different squad out there. So for anyone that's like, oh, you got to fight the Hive Tyrant. No, no, he's over there. He's not their problem. That task will be relegated to another squad, as it is in the main campaign. So before anyone brings that up, shut the fuck up. It's a completely different squad. As far as most of the basic units that you fight, it's mostly Hormigons and Terragons, which are around the size of like, I don't know, like a dog, basically. They're smaller than the size of an adult human. Terragons have like these little corrosive, like basically like bone weapons. They can like shoot you. Most of the energy shields of the Spartans should be able to handle that. They could just punch them and crush their skulls. I think it's really going to be like the Tyranid warriors that are going to be the main issue, because now, while the Spartans do have energy shields, obviously that is going to protect them a lot. The Tyranid warriors that throw themselves at them are actually a match for, if not a little bit stronger than what the Space Marines are in most circumstances. That would, in this case, include the Spartans. because they are equivalent to the Space Marines in the scenario. There are 4 of them, but there are usually 3 to sometimes 5 or 6 Tyranid warriors at a time that come flying at you. And they usually engage you in melee combat because most of their body has been modified to be a direct combat unit for the Tyranid Swarm. As with all things, anyone's going to point out that the Tyranids are a swarm, a collective, so everything that they do in the scenario is guided by the Gestalt hive mind, or more accurately, whatever the hive mind of this specific fleet is. To which, yes, you're correct. As far as how that's going to affect their general tactics, I would assume they're just going to fight whoever's in the given scenario, because the scenario of the game demonstrates how the Tyranids decide to adapt and evolve, and how they decide to send like different units. Overall, it doesn't seem to change that much. I guess they did. I guess they just generally deploy like more Zornthropes over the course of the battle. They don't really like do anything that much. They just keep swarming. They do send out lictors. Sorry, they do send out lictors occasionally, and some Ravagers, but that's standard procedure for the Tyranids. Ravagers are essentially like long, sneaky Tyranids that they're going to have to deal with. They're basically the size of like 2 Tyranid warriors put together. They're a little bit bigger. They're going to have to stay clear of those. Most of these are about as fast, if not slightly faster than the Space Marine. So the Spartans are going to have to dodge and run and like move very quickly and just kind of camp them. As far as their weapons, you might be asking, will their weapons be able to kill them? I've explained this before in the many protagonist swaps summaries before this, but just to reiterate, UNSC kinetic weapons are very, very, very powerful. They can go through elite shields and combat armor, which is reverse engineered from the Forerunners on a lower grade, but still taken from the Forerunners directly. The weakest of these can easily tank multiple grenades and still keep going. Their weapons by the end of the war, UNSC weapons, such as the battle rifle and the Halo 1 pistol, can basically pop those shields that their grenades at the beginning of the war couldn't do in like a few shots. So they're way stronger by the end of the war, and they're holding like post-war weapons, specifically weapons during Halo 5. And this is also after the Requiem campaign, so their weapons would most likely be even better, especially since they're aboard the Infinity. And also, something I'd like to mention, Zim might actually like this. I found out in Halo Infinite the other day that according to one of the helmets, the Spirit of Fire, and this is relevant to what I'm saying, Spirit of Fire, basically, during their time on the Ark, they actually just started taking Ark technology and reverse engineering it into their Mjolnir suits and some of the tech that they have. So that's actually one of the logical explanations for why the Spirit of Fire has the tech level to fight things like the Banished. Because whenever they were lacking, they would just go out to the Ark and just grab shit and put it on their ships and their weapons and their armor.
Dude. It's called being based.
Yes.
It's called being the best commander in the fucking entire series.
Well, I'm just saying, like, technically, that's not like out of, that's not out of left field. Humanity has reverse engineered forwarder tech before. This just confirms that even like the Spirit of Fire can do it. And the Spirit of Fire, while it does have like a frigate that's designed with like fabricating bases, it's a mid UNSC like Covenant warship. Like it's not like a 2550 ship. It wasn't built for late war stage warfare, and it's not like an experimental ship either. It's not a post-war ship. It's not like the Infinity, which is like the pride of the UNSC fleet and a super carrier. Why I'm bringing all of this up is effectively that like the UNSC's rate of evolving their technology is insane. In a few years, they could produce something that was literally thousands of years beyond what their tech level could normally accomplish. So um, their battle rifles would be a lot stronger, and they could already cut through those existing shields that I mentioned before. So they should be able to get through the heads of most of the Tyranid warriors, Raveners, pretty easily, as well as like what's it called?
Um,
Hormagontlets or Hormagaunts, Termagaunts. I think the only difference they would have, or the only problems they would have, would be fighting Carnifexes, probably, and Zoranthropes, as well as a Hive Tyrant if they fought a Hive Tyrant, but for the reasons I've explained, that I could be fighting a Hive Tyrant. Additionally, Tanaka, according to her descriptions in the Halo 5 guidebook, she is basically stated to be a gifted gadget guru. That she's the electronics and engineering expert of Fireteam Osiris. Her keen mind and broad experience allow her to discern the function and operation of human, Covenant, and Forerunner devices and traps without the assistance of smart AI analysts. Um, I'm just bringing this up because if they're out there in the field, she should be able to figure out the function and weapons of like most tech that they see out there. She might struggle a little bit with the Tyranids, but there's also other bolter rounds and other Space Marine weapons out there in the field that they can just scavenge. Anyway, it's probably only going to take a few bullets to get through the Tyranid warriors, because most of like battle rifles and DMRs usually fire like multiple rounds at a time and have high penetration rifle shots. Plus, Tyranid warriors, well, actually every Tyranid species, you can just kill them by destroying their head, because the way that they exist out there in the field is through a synaptic connection to the hive mind. So when you kill a Tyranid warrior, for example, that breaks the synapses connection to all the other smaller creatures, and that reverts them down to their lowest base instinct, and they just start running around, essentially. You see this in Space Marine 2 as well. When you kill them in the game, it's actually a gameplay mechanic. That when you kill a Tyranid a Tyranid warrior, I think it spews a bunch of like green, like gray matter out of their brain, and the little Tyranids just like run around. But like they get distracted and confused because they don't understand what just happens. Some of them die depending on the severity of the psychic link, because it's when you're destroying them, when you're destroying Tyranid warriors or bigger Tyranids, they are essentially akin to a what do you call it? Like a node, like in a computer, like a. I'm trying to think of like an analogy. They're basically like a collection, like a little small data bank of psychic energy for the consciousness of the hive mind. So they have a little bit more sentience. So when you blow up their head or when you kill them, that releases a massive wave of psychic feedback, which is felt by all the synapse creatures. Hence why they run away. So all the Osiris is going to have to do is kill one Tyranid warrior and just pay attention to what happens. And that's not going to be that difficult because they're going to be in the midst of fighting them, and they'll realize after going for the head that headshots work, and then the rest of the Tyranids just start screaming once they blow up in their head, and they'll be like, oh, target the big ones then. Plus, their fists are strong enough to actually damage their faces and their limbs. Space Marines can effectively do the same thing. Plus, you have executions in the game that after you like wound them, you can literally rip off parts of their arms and shove it in their face. And I'm not talking executions that involve the chainsword. I'm talking like you just grabbed them with your gauntlets and just shoved their own limbs back up through their rib cage. The Spartans are at least as strong as the Space Marines in this scenario. They should be capable of doing the same thing. This also means that they're probably going to have to watch their ammo, because they're going to realize how many of these guys exist everywhere. So they're just going to be kind of like punching, probably using whatever knives or weapons they can, maybe even grabbing like, honestly, just grabbing like any combat knives or things from the weapon ammunition stores in the fields. Yeah, this is still technically the first mission. I know this is taking a while, but for all intents and purposes, you have to understand that like the Tyranids have like so many people on the fucking field. They have like, I think they usually send millions, if not billions, of Tyranids to a planet at a time. And while most of them are off fighting like the Imperial Guard and like the planetary forces, you're still fighting thousands in the main campaign per mission, just for your own squad. And a lot of missions you're alone. So it's going to take them some time before they get to Captain Eden, who they have to rendezvous with. And then they just have to recapture that existing facility. They'll probably stumble upon a lictor once they're getting to the edge of this jungle. So, a lictor, for anyone who's unaware, is basically a Tyranid that turns invisible. Or, no, it doesn't. Technically, it doesn't turn invisible. It uses. It's a Tyranid hive. It's a Tyranid life form that was made by the hive mind to be like a scout troop that's also like way more powerful than a Tyranid warrior. And it has sort of chameleon scales on its body, so it can blend in and have camouflage the way that like an iguana does. Except it's just so good at camouflage, it's practically invisible if you can't see it normally. For the Spartans, this isn't going to be like too much of an issue. Not only do they have like enhanced forms of eyesight, they also have like HUDs and visual overlays that can detect anything, any movement signatures. They have a onboard computer for their Mjolnir suit. They also have the Artemis system and their Smart Link. They also have motion sensors and increased hearing. The Lictor, while it is fast and it is pretty stealthy, it's not like, what do we say, it's not silent. It does weigh like more than several tons because it can like toss around Space Marines. So it is making a decent amount of noise when it runs around. And I mean, it's still going to, well, go ahead.
Regardless, their camouflage is more than likely still inferior to like elite camouflage, wouldn't it be?
Oh, yes, because it doesn't, the elite camouflage bends light, or it bends light around the user, so they are effectively invisible. Whereas the Lictor has to kind of like change the properties of its chameleon line has to blend in with each existing area that it's in. So it kind of has to like be very cautious when it's moving from area to area when the terrain changes color or has like different types of foliage. Now, luckily, this jungle is mostly all the same. It's just like greens and browns and whatnot, which is fine for like a Lictor. In the game, it just turns invisible, but that's because the game is just trying to visually depict it as best as possible. That's not actually what the Lictor technically looks like. Like, that wouldn't actually be a functional version of it. It's just that it would be practically invisible if you weren't actually trying to stare at it. So, they're going to fight that Lictor in that one Lictor boss fight. And they'll just... well, okay, so since Vale is with them, I can kind of Vale in anyone that has, like, plasma weapons, and if we say that, what's his face, Locke has a light rifle, it really doesn't matter if he doesn't, but if he has a light rifle, they're kind of going to stomp the Lictor, because, like, plasma is way too hot for Tyranids to survive. They can't even survive, like, las guns, and las guns aren't even, like, strictly known for their heat. Well, okay, they are known for their heat, but like they're not flamers. They're not like meltaguns. They're not like thermal weapons like Volkite pistols. And they certainly aren't plasma. So something that hot is going to start melting portions of a Lictor's body. Fortunately for the Tyranids, they do have a lot of biomass. So even if something is strong enough to penetrate their body, unless it can penetrate for a significant length of time, it's not going to usually be enough to kill higher forms of Tyranids because they just have so much meat on their bones. But what it does also mean is that the Tyranid doesn't actually have proper functional armor because you can just keep firing armor-piercing rounds at it and blowing off portions of its limbs until it keeps getting slowly like weaker and weaker and weaker and losing like more energy. Also, the Tyranids are actually imbued with a set amount of energy as per the hive mind. Like the hive mind designates that they only get this many it's either this many like amino acids or something. Like the hive mind makes a specific calculation to determine how much energy or how much biomass should go into each thing along with the adjusting energy, and then they adjust it for specific climates. So if you shoot a lictor's arms or legs off, it's going to keep losing more and more of that energy. It has a finite amount of that, and it can only really recuperate if it consumes other life forms, which in this case it's not going to have the chance to. So they're probably going to stomp the lictor with enough fire, enough gunfire.
It's beautiful.
Though it will take them by a little. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. The proper way to deal with your enemies with just enough firepower.
Well, that's how they basically kill the Tyranids in every single situation. Every given theoretical situation, it's like, oh, we can't fight them. We need more guns, more bodies, which have more guns, bigger body. Like that's always the issue. Is just Warhammer's main solution to their problem, which is throwing more stuff at it, is incredibly effective against the Tyranids. Also, because the Tyranids, despite their adaptive nature, cannot adapt to the conventional effectiveness of just shooting a bullet at them. Unfortunately. So after they kill this, they're going to go through the facility, regroup with the Imperial Guard, and then start asking questions about what they're doing here. The Imperial Guard's going to be puzzled why this random Space Marine looking super soldier that's also not nearly as wide as a Space Marine is here. Also, why there are female Space Marines, because that is physiologically impossible. They'll be like, yeah, we're Spartans, which were created by his emperor or something. I actually don't know what. Honestly, I can't come up with a logical excuse that Locke could give to excuse them. Like Locke's an Oni agent. He's very good at making a cover for whatever it is he's doing. But I don't think he's going to be able to bullshit his way out of. It's yeah, the Emperor of Mankind sent us. Unless we intervene as the omniscient narrator, they're just going to be sus. They're just going to be giving them sus looks the entire time. Just tell them yeah, go kill the Tyranids over there. We'll continue this conversation later, mutants.
Yikes.
Well, generally they would probably, if not regarding them as flat out as mutants, they would think oh, are you with the Inquisition or the Assassinorum? And they're like, we're with the
Yes.
Office of Naval Intelligence. Yes.
Whatever you said we're a part of, yes. The answer is yes.
We're here to kill the Tyranids. What Locke would be is we're here to kill the Tyranids. That's all that matters, and we just finished fighting a bunch of those big ones. So send us where we need to go, and then they just send them to retaking the facility and the satellite dishes, which I believe are needed to evacuate the rest of the people off of the planets, because you have to get the rest of the Imperial assets, their ships, their weapons, their armor, and obviously personnel. This is, oh my god, this is the most annoying part. I hated this part of the mission. You have to go up to the top of these antennas after fighting your way into the facility, and they just get swarmed by dozens of gargoyles in the sky. And that's per everything. So there's hundreds, possibly thousands flying around them in the sky. You don't have to fight all of them. You only have to shoot the ones that are up there. And you yourself don't have to fight the gargoyles, technically, because they just attack the station, but you still have to shoot them while you're also fighting all the Tyranids on the ground around you, and all the Tyranid warriors, and then eventually the Zoranthrope. So, all right. So I think the Zoranthrope showing up would actually make a difference when they're having to kill multiple gargoyles, many gargoyles, Hormigons, several Tyranid warriors charging at them, even with 4 of them at the same time. I feel like a Zoanthrope showing up out of the middle of nowhere with a giant psychic barrier levitating in like the fucking Emperor is kind of a bit too much for the Spartans to handle. Just because in that mission in particular, you are in a small area. You're fighting like sometimes half a dozen to as many as like a dozen Tyranid warriors at the same time, with dozens of little ones, plus like a dozen of gargoyles on like multiple antenna arrays, and they're probably going to have to split up to cover these areas, which means their forces are going to be divided against all of these things at the same time, plus the zoanthrope flying in, which is just going to start shooting like direct warp energy at them. So I think it's a good chance that whoever's getting hit by that is going to lose their shields and is just going to get swarmed by Tyranid units. Most likely. I don't know if they would necessarily die unless the Tyranids just like all focused the single Spartan that lost their shields. Granted, they could just, use their thruster packs, most of their grav and mag boots to just run up the side of like a wall and then just try to fly away. But like some of the Tyranids do have guns. There are also gargoyles. So there's a chance that whoever they target will probably get incapacitated and will either need to be revived or will basically get locked up in armor lock, unable to be affected by the enemy or their ally until they get saved. So I think, for what it's worth, they will probably kill most of the gargoyles on the antenna arrays, but whoever the zoanthrope decides to target and the rest of the zoanthrope decides to target and the rest of the Tyranid warriors decide to converge on is probably going to go down. They're not going to die, but they're going to get incapacitated. I'm sorry, what?
Sorry, I'm almost talking to me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they do have the weapons needed to take them off the antenna arrays, so they could just headshot most of their heads consistently, and then just scavenge whatever bolter rounds are on the platform or whatever bolter things are on the platform, because they could also use those. But yeah, this is gonna take its toll eventually. They're probably gonna have to revive that person. I'm just gonna assume it was probably either Tanaka or Buck, because I don't see Vale dying to anybody when she has plasma weapons. I don't see that happening, and I definitely don't see Buck losing, since he's like the most skilled out of all of them. Then technically you'd have a light rifle. I could see Buck doing it, since he's, or Tanaka, since she also has a shotgun. She'd have to get in close. So they're probably going to complete that mission after defending the existing antenna. And then the next mission at the end of Kadaku would be, I believe, Severance. This mission is mostly just... Hang on. Oh yeah, you have to find the Archmagos, Nazarick, and you have to evacuate him from Kadaku, but he refuses to leave without taking his data. So you have to end up going into his facility and basically just retrieving the data and then destroying. Actually, I don't know if you destroy the reactors or you just leave them, but it's essentially like an asset denial mission. So typical stuff that Spartans are usually used to. This mission does have a lot of jump packs, and it also has that weird section inside the generator room. Oh wait, no, they didn't run into the Lictor until this mission. Never mind. Disregard everything I said about the Lictor, or just take whatever I said about the Lictor and apply it to this mission.
Dude, just forget the last 7 minutes of discussing the Lictor. Understood.
Yes. So this is weird. So in this mission, when you're going through the facility, you run into the rat swarms, which I believe are referred to as the Skaven. But I'm just going to make a pretty bold, well, not really a big bold claim, just kind of an understandable claim, is that the Skaven aren't really a part of like Warhammer 40k's main lore, or even really at all. They were originally a series or a species that was created around like rats and vermin for Rogue Trader, which was the predecessor to Warhammer 40k, and then I believe they became an official like a species in Warhammer 40k fantasy, along with like a bunch of other species that never really made it into 40k in its initial setting or in later settings. So they just added them to fantasy, which is cool. But point is that the Skaven don't really have any real lore because they're not actually like a proper faction at all. So I don't know effectively anything about them, and also because they only show up for like one mission for one section. So they're basically just a bunch of rats that collect themselves together in giant, massive mounds like ants, and then attack you by flinging themselves at you. So you can just kill them with like a sufficient amount of rounds or fire or something like that. Now, in the case of the UNSC here, they didn't bring a flamethrower with them, so they're probably either going to have to scavenge flamer weapons or they're going to have to do some pretty serious parkour flying around the room, avoiding the Skaven. Because there is like their weapons are pinpoint precise weapons. Like they can fight something as numerous as the Tyranids because most of them have like sizable heads, and you can technically just kill the synapses creatures, like I said, and then kill the small ones afterwards. Can't do that with the Skaven. Can't do that with the Skaven at all. There's way too many of them. There's literally like hundreds of thousands of them in a given room. If you've ever seen a playthrough of like Space Marine 2. So if they don't pick up a flamethrower, it's hardcore parkour. Like it's around the entire room, just avoiding them like the literal plague they are. Clinging to the raptors or to the upper areas of the generators, just avoiding the floors like the floor is lava, because it basically is. I never figured that their main strategy was to run and hide. But honestly, without a flamethrower, you're not going to be able to kill the Skaven pretty effectively. Otherwise, you're just going to get swallowed by them. And for anyone wondering what they're going to do with Tanaka, or yeah, we'll say it's like Tanaka that gets knocked out. They can just revive her, technically, because Halo 5 and Halo Reach confirms that the UNSC has like medic technology and equipment where they can revitalize Spartans emergency like field aid into the field. We're not talking like bioarm or biofoam. Like they actually have like advanced healing technology they can use to bring them out of their armor when it's locked up. Because Spartans in critical condition just get put into armor lock as of like their Mark 6s. Hence where the revive mechanic comes from. So they'll just revive her afterwards, so she'll be walking around just fine. After this, honestly, they'll just run through the facility, turning on the generators, voiding the Skaven like the plague. Whenever they see that one Zoranthrope, they'll immediately hard target that thing with all the rockets and fire that they have and just kill it immediately. Because its shields are kind of annoying and are made of a lot of psychic energy. You can actually just penetrate it with significant amounts of force and enough bullets and weapons, because it will just break down and then you just punch out its face. As the Zoranthrope has a very physically weak body. It's basically like the Baphomet from DMC5, where its body is essentially has atrophied limbs. I guess the way this designed is just that it's supposed to have powerful psychic abilities, but then really weak body to compensate. I don't know, balance or something. Then after that, they'll just take the data, move to the next area to rescue the Archmagos, and use the existing jump packs. Well, actually, no, they won't have to use the jump packs because they've got Gen 2. They can just use their existing thruster packs. Well, actually, technically, their thruster packs don't propel them in. Well, okay, no, they do propel them a little bit into the air, but they're not like the jump packs the Astartes have. So they might either need to grab an Astartes jump pack, or they're going to have to do some climbing. or a lot of running and jumping. Well, actually, they do have mag grips and things of that nature. They can grip onto surfaces, so it's possible they could just jump off of a wall, grip it, and then use their thrusters to glide across. It's just going to take them a lot longer to get through the area than the Space Marines, because the Space Marines have better jump packs. Not that UNSC doesn't have jump packs, but they don't have that jump pack. They have different thrusters. Then after this, they just have to destroy parts of this Tyranid wall to get near the Archmagos. They technically could try to climb up over it, but since there are Tyranids everywhere, they'll just like concentrate their fire on the given area. They'll realize they have to do this because, one, the area is connected to a hive of biomass. Two, after experiencing and encountering the Tyranids often enough, they will realize that almost everything related to the Tyranids is based on the biomass they have in the area. So they'll just look at whichever nodes or things are producing the Tyranids and will just destroy them, which destroys the wall and allows them to pass through. And then find the Archmagos, who ends up dying, basically, because he gets eradicated by the what's it called? The traders. They basically stab him, kill him, intercept his ship. So they end up having to go look for his disciple on Alvarax. And Machinist Divinus, which is mission 4, I believe? Operation 3? Mission 4?
I wouldn't know.
I'm sorry, what?
I wouldn't know. I have yet to play Space Marine 2.
Yes, well, so the main reason they're looking for Magos, the Archmagos, is because they have to activate Project Aurora. That's the reason the Space Marine battle barge is in the area, because it's of such strategic importance to them to get this device here that it could change. I don't know, like it's bleeding edge technology. You end up finding out that the device they're looking for in the Aurora device is actually the power source from Space Marine 1 that was destroyed by Titus at the end of the game. And they reconstructed it to reuse it again. Even though the Ultramarines were clearly like, yeah, this is like a heretical device. Destroy it. It would cause more harm than good. And the Mechanicum was like, understood. Also the Mechanicum, let's repair it. Discover more. Praise the machine spirit. Totally not a bad idea. Anyway, they just have to go find Louise. So they'll, like before, they'll regroup at the battle barge after they basically call this in to their not their Vox, their Mjolnir, their Mjolnir radio channels. They'll just radio up to the Astartes crew, and then eventually they'll tell them like, "Hey, I've got a location of his disciple, Louise. I need you to go and find him. He's over in this sector on Alvarax, in this completely different planet. So go find him so we can continue Project Aurora." And then they just go relocate over there, looking for him. And then I think they end up finding out that during this mission they have to go to the Mechanicus. They have to go to a specific area to find the Mechanicus Cogitator in order to locate where Louise is on the planet. And then, yeah, that just involves you fighting like a shitload of Tyranids once you start ascending through the elevators on the top of these raptor areas in this city, because you're basically at the top of these skyscrapers running through your facility. So you have to fight like a bunch of gargoyles on this defend sequence where they're basically attacking the elevator chains that are lowering you down to a facility. And then eventually when you get inside the facility and you start restarting the system, I think it opens the door, you move through a couple more rooms, and then you eventually run into a Carnifex. So the Carnifex is basically the Tyranids' answer to the Imperium of Mankind's dreadnought. It is literally like a giant hulking mass that's meant to take out tanks. Or maybe not tanks, but like, giant mech suits. Toss around Terminators and fight the standard dreadnoughts. It does have feats in the Warriors of Ultramar novel of lifting up a double layered adamantium door that is over 4 tons, and it just kind of like breaks it open. So it's definitely physically bigger and stronger, or at least physically weighs more than a dreadnought, which is about 4 tons. So that's this thing's like it almost weighs as much as a hunter, but it's obviously like a lot bigger. So naturally, what are the Spartans going to do? Well, they'll probably just shoot it in the head repeatedly, over and over and over and over and over again. It is extremely tanky though, so if they shoot it anywhere but the head, they're just going to be running for like 20 minutes straight while they're emptying all their ammo into its sides, because it takes the Carnifex a very, very, very long time to die. Like, it is a very tanky enemy.
Oh no, I know. I remember.
It's basically a boss. I know that some people will point out that, well, the Marines can basically rip off its like head and shove it in. If the Spartans are stronger, then why can't they do it? That's not that simple. In the actual lore, like Space Marines do actually get killed pretty easily by the Carnifex, and Titus at the beginning of the game literally gets run through by the Carnifex and it kills him immediately. I know the Primaris Marines are stronger, but they're not that much stronger. There's not like that much of a meaningful difference. Plus, you can only do that to the Carnifex as an execution on the Carnifex after you've broken it down. And technically, you have executions on every single enemy in the game that's like a man-sized enemy or higher. Like, you can execute the Hell Beasts or the Chaos Dreadnoughts. You can execute like Traitor Marines, Traitor Dreadnoughts, Carnifexes, Lictors, Tyranid Warriors, Tyranid Zoranthropes, both the bosses and the standard ones. You can execute almost everything in the game, regardless of its size. So it's not really all that indicative of what's it called? It's not really all that indicative of your strength, because you still have to weaken them. So they'll just keep shooting at any of its major organs that they can expose in its head until eventually it just dies. The one great thing about the Carnifex, though, is that if it's by itself, which in this case it is, you can just run circles around it and avoid it. And the more you shoot it, the more damage it will take, so eventually it will die. This is not really comparable to, the 3 Carnifex boss fight that you have to fight later, which is a much bigger problem. Oh, and then you have to defend the reactor later when you go to get the data. That involves fighting waves and waves of Tyranids and Zoranthropes. We'll just assume they're going to scavenge weapons and armor here. It's also possible that they could just run into a UNSC weapon drop at this point, since, like I said, there's a few of them on these levels. I'm going to say there's at least one of them every planet. I kind of completely glossed over the one that would have been on Kadaku, but I will not gloss over it for Avarax. In this weapon drop, we'll say they have access to a railgun, saws, maybe like Covenant weapons or some Promethean weapons. All of those weapons or any heavy weapons would probably devastate Zoranthropes and other Tyranid warriors pretty easily. As long as they don't have to fight like multiple Carnifexes, they will be fine. And they can just protect the reactor while they extract the data and then leave. Then they just take the data that they need there and then use it to go find, what's it called? The fucking... What's the name of the... Luis. That's what it is. They have to go find Louise. I bet. And once they go find Louise, well, actually, once they go regroup during Servitive Machine to the Temple of Thesium, they will just have to fight a bunch of Tyranids in the given area. They have to fight a Nernthrope boss, which is just, well, actually, no. It's a Nernthrope, not a Zoanthrope. It's a slightly bigger Zernthrope. Oh, yes. So normally that would be a problem, but like I think this boss fight is mostly a 1v1. You might occasionally summon other Tyranids. It is a bigger Zoanthrope, but like it's also just basically a Zoanthrope. It doesn't actually do anything meaningfully different. If it was like multiple Lickers or multiple Carnifexes, I could sort of understand that, but like a Zoanthrope is more of a support Tyranid unit. It's not supposed to be by itself as a commando role. It literally has an atrophied body. Like if someone just shoots it enough, you could just drop the Psyker Fields and then just rip off its limbs, which is not something that the Northrop wants to be. Not a situation the Northrop wants to be in. Then after this, when you regroup with a bunch of Space Marines down there in the field and Imperial Guardsmen, they'll lead you to the next area that you're going to, because they'll tell you that, like, obviously you need to look for Louise, and they're like, well, I know there's a temple over here that we're pushing towards with these tanks. And then eventually you run into the traitors. And this is where Chaos shows up. Now, I think after this and Void Song, this is like the last major mission involving Tyranids, and then it's just like Chaos troops for the rest of the campaign. Okay, so Chaos in this game is just the Thousand Suns, more specifically the Rubric Marines, after they've been affected by the Rubric Curse, along with their Traitor Guardsmen and some of their little Zeech demons. So, normally, running into a lot of Space Marines, and I do mean like a lot of them, like dozens of them at a time, even with the stronger weapons that they have, would be a tactical problem given the fact that enough of them firing back at the Spartans eventually could be an issue, since they're basically the same speed and strength as a Space Marine. And there's only like 4 of them versus like, dozens and dozens of Space Marines and Space Marine Terminators. The problem here is that this is the Rubric Marines. These aren't like actual proper Space Marines. So the Rubric Marines are the Thousand Suns after their bodies have basically been turned to dust, and they were given like spiritual, like warp constructed equivalents of their Astartes armor. And their souls are trapped in that armor. So like whenever you destroy the armor or destroy major portions of the armor, like the head or the internal plates or where the organs are, the soul disperses from the armor gets destroyed, turns to dust again. So the actual Space Marine isn't really in the armor. Like his whole consciousness isn't there. We see this as well in, I believe, the Talons of Horus and other future Black Legion novels, that some of the Thousand Suns that still weren't turned into that weren't affected by the curse of the Rubric, they actually retain all of their memories and like their sanity and everything. Like they know they're full people. The people who are turned into Rubric Marines, they're basically autonomous robots. They don't really have a sentience anymore. So the traitors that you fight in Space Marine 2, at least the ones that aren't sorcerers or dreadnoughts or the final boss of the game, are not really like actual people. They don't have a full consciousness there, which means they also don't really have tactics or any sort of experience involved. They're just kind of in like an autonomous fight mode, like, oh, just kill the enemy, purge the disciples of the false emperor, So just shoot anything that isn't us, which means they're not going to be using tactics, and that's pretty much how they fight in the campaign. They just slowly sort of walk towards you. They don't take cover. They don't do anything. And that's also how they're treated in the novels as well. So I think they're just going to get stomped by Fireteam Osiris, because they're just going to be slowly walking towards them menacingly until they get gunned down. Even the Terminators, which while Terminators are a little bit more durable, you can technically just kill them with enough bolter rounds. And Space Marines do have bolter rounds here, and they also have more powerful weapons. So they just have to avoid those. There are flamers, but flamers shouldn't really do anything considering their heat is insignificant compared to that of like plasma and plasma guns. And those things can be shrugged off by both Mjolnir armor and the shields around them. So that's shooting a flame at them is basically going to make the Spartans laugh. It's not even worthy of being called a shower.
Bruh.
Um, sorry, was that too much of a diss?
How dare you disrespect the Imperium of Man like this?
I was only disrespecting the flamer, the Imperium of Man. Technically, I'm talking about the traitors. The Imperium of Man would appreciate my disrespect of traitors because they're heretics.
Bruh.
Even though it's the Thousand Sons, so technically they're not actually heretics. They were loyal and they were killed for being loyal. But that's beside the point. So once you get to the plaza area right outside where Louise is, because he's sealed inside of this building, you just have to kill a bunch of enemies there. You do fight a lesser sorcerer, which could be a problem if the sorcerer in the game actually did anything other than just throwing basic sorcery magics at you. So the problem is that like Thousand Sun sorcerers are actually some of the best, like probably the best psychers the Space Marines have ever produced, aside from Grey Knights, because they created like their own schools of thought involving psyker powers in the Thousand Sons and things like the Burning of Prospero novels of the Horus Heresy. So they have so much stuff that they could teach people and that you could learn and that you could use for various ways to hurting people with the properties of warp, like warp fire, warp lightning, a bunch of different forms of matter manipulation, mind abilities, levitation, a bunch of stuff. But that's like them during their prime. Like the sorcerers now are kind of just like acting like a bunch of morons. They just throw like basic warp projectiles at you. They don't, and they just attack you in melee combat. They don't do anything creative with their projectiles or their attacks. I know they technically should have more powerful sorcery, but this is really the full extent of what they bring to the table in the game. It's not that impressive, and you can quite easily dodge it. Not to mention, any person with a significantly powerful gun can just shoot the sorcerer. It's not like the final boss where he has like extremely powerful psychic barriers around him. He should actually have weaker psychic barriers than the Zoanthropes or the Neuranthropes boss, because the Zoanthrope even has statements that he would have that the energy it takes to levitate himself on the own would actually tax the most powerful of human psychers. So they're already above typical Space Marine, like, well, not just humans, but like Space Marine psychers. So in general, you can kind of argue that if they can kill the Zoanthropes or get through any barrier they have, they can get through any barrier that the Thousand Sun sorcerers could produce, aside from the final boss, since he's basically a tool for Zeech in this invasion. So he's a little bit more powerful. That's the benefit he gets. And then after they save Louise, they're gonna run back over to what's it called, the battle barge, to discuss plans of, I believe, going back to the Tyranids, going to a relay facility. Because I think their goal after this point was to leave a message for Calgar, because they had to get the rest of the Ultramarines chapter to unite here due to the value of the Aurora device, according to what Louise says. Because Louise basically says, like, this is something that, if used effectively, could basically turn the tide of not just the battle in this system, but also affect the Imperium. Like, we need more forces here. So they have to go back down onto Alvarax to, well, essentially get a message to Calgar. The other side missions that are happening will be accomplished by uh, another squad at this time. This will be the last mission with the Tyranids. So most of this is just going to proceed as normal. They're just going to make their way through the Tyranids in the areas outside of their little bell tower and into some of the upper chapels until they eventually reach the relay facility. And then they just have to defend the existing relay from like a shitload of Tyranids. I think during that point, you actually have to fight two Carnifexes at a time and a bunch of Tyranid warriors. So I think there is a chance, given the sheer amount of opposition that they face during this mission, the campaign, that they could probably lose a person or two. And this is before they fight Ymura, the final boss. Because as I said before, the Carnifexes are strong enough by themselves to definitely damage them and get through their energy shields. But there are two of them, and there are also Tyranid warriors running around at the same time. I think if one of them gets a little bit unlucky, probably going to be Buck or Tanaka.
What do
Nothing
you
against
mean?
them, but
Buck's literally the best guy on Osiris team. What are you
no, that
smoking?
that would be Locke. I believe
No.
Locke has statements that he's the pinnacle of humanity, and he also has the best skill feats out of
Pinnacle of
any of them.
Pinnacle of humanity, huh? That's crazy. Where was he in Infinite, Mangler? Where was he during the war against the Covenant? Pinnacle of
Where
humanity,
was
my ass.
where was Buck during the war against like fucking during Infinity? Where was any of them?
Oh, the Buck's not the pinnacle of humanity, though. That's crazy. Pinnacle of humanity? It's crazy.
I'm
Get this,
sorry, but that's what's
get,
stated. He's like the best Spartan 4.
get this
He's also
wank
trained to
out of
hunt
my
other
sight.
Spartan 4s. He's also trained to hunt other Spartan 4s, something that like Buck has only recently been transitioned to this team for doing.
Bruh. How dare you say that slander when Rookie exists? Right over there in the
Rookie
dead chat.
Rookie died to a headshot from a rebel scum. So I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear this
I'd like
this
to see
wank.
I'd like to see this pinnacle of humanity take a direct headshot. I'd like to see the pinnacle of humanity withstand that bullet. If they can't, I'm gonna use that fucking
Actually,
wank.
he's a Spartan, so there is a good chance he could survive a headshot, even though it would hurt him.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Much more than a normal human.
Uh-huh.
That's
Until
for
that
certain.
point, I don't want to hear this fucking wank continue, but keep yourself in check.
Oh my god. Listen, I'm the one that went through Halo 5 multiple times and read all the
Bruh.
guides and purchased all the material.
Pinnacle of
So
humanity.
how about you just sit back in your little corner over there?
I'm sorry,
Mind your own business.
did the pinnacle of humanity beat Master Chief in that 1v1? No? I'm gonna need you to sit the fuck down, son.
Actually, he doesn't lose in the 1v1 either. He throws hands with him and he's even with him. It's only when he pulls out the armor lock device that it fucks up, but that's also
Dang,
because Master
dang.
Chief
Pinnacle,
sticks it on his
pinnacle of
body.
humanity couldn't use his own tool to win. Crazy.
It's almost like he's fighting a
Crazy.
guy that has literal plot armor or something.
Oh, plot armor, very convenient. Very. Why didn't the pinnacle of humanity deal with Atriox Mangler? Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, because he just wasn't around.
Oh,
Sorry, he
he
can't be everywhere.
just wasn't around. That's crazy. Crazy.
Listen, we're getting sidetracked. I
Uh-huh.
was just explaining that if anyone on Fireteam Osiris is gonna die, it's not gonna be Vale or Locke. It's
Uh-huh.
gonna be Tanaka probably or Buck. But
Crazy.
Buck's goal is literally just a rifleman. Like that's his main role. He doesn't specialize in anything.
Crazy. All this downplay of ODST.
Okay, well,
Crazy.
I guess he has a rocket launcher, so he's got a higher chance of survival than Tanaka does.
I'm just making sure to, just keep you in check. Now I'm gonna go have some breakfast. I'll be listening. I better not hear none of that bullshit
How long are
anymore.
you going to have breakfast? Because we're still recording.
No, don't worry. I'll be close by. Don't worry. I'll be listening.
Also, how long has this been recording? Because I feel like this has been over an hour.
It's an hour and 10 minutes.
Oh boy.
You have
All
been
right.
you took quite a while on that one Tyranid discussion.
I know the Tyranids take a lot of time, but so I think one of them will get incapacitated. We can just say both of them get incapacitated just to make it like easier, and then they get armor locked. That way, everybody wins. Um, I still think they're going to kill the Carnifexes pretty handily, though, even with two Spartans down, because they could just keep running and making circles, especially with their grenades, especially plasma grenades, because they could just stick one on the Carnifex's face and then blow up his head. I'm fairly certain that they would have saved many of them for dealing with them anyway after the first Carnifex battle. I'm just assuming that in this circumstance, they would have gotten the jump on the Spartans since they would have had to fight a bunch of Tyranid warriors and exhaust a lot of their ammo and probably a decent bit of their stamina. And then the Carnifexes just jump up because that's how the actual battle sequence happens. You fight a ton of Tyranid warriors and soldiers all across the platform, and they're just swarming you, and you're killing them relentlessly. And then you think you're done, and then two Carnifexes just jump up there, and they're like, "Hey." So it's not an ideal situation if you're running low on ammo. Um, well, at least if you don't have plasma weapons, like Vale. So after they kill the Carnifexes, that's basically the end of the mission. Because you just go to the relay sanctum afterwards. Oh wait, no, then they have to fight Emora. Hmm. Yeah, so Emora is the main. He's the main like boss of the game, but you do fight him twice. You fight him once here, and then you fight him again at the very end of the game. During, I believe, the one mission on Demirium, which is Dawn's Descent. But he kind of just throws like tons of projectiles at you. He summons Servants of Zeech. I believe he also has that one Knowledge Piercer attack, which is just like a giant beam. And then he also summons a Warp Gate. Then he also has a bunch of other projectiles and attacks that he can do. And yeah, a few other things. Hmm. Well, there are a few other ones. Yeah, no, he only has like 4 abilities, technically. Most of these are easily dodgeable attacks, save for the beam one and some of his scythe sweeps. I will say that any attack that he throws that has concentrated warp energy is probably going to dissipate their shields, which is, to be fair, a lot of them. But anything involving a beam is probably going to go through their shields and badly damage them, because most of it is just pure arcane energy focused into kinetic power. So it's going to be stronger than any like conventional projectiles or things that they have. That and that it's mainly meant to kill things like Space Marines. Granted, it won't really damage their soul or their minds the way that like the warp typically does, but I'll explain why that is in a moment. Overall, they just kind of have to like camp him and shoot his shield over and over again until he just fucks off. Because like you don't really actually beat what's his face? You don't really beat
The main boss there.
yeah. Well, you don't really beat him at all, technically. Because Imura isn't defeated by you during this setting. He just kind of leaves after trying to corrupt the Astropath for sending the message, which still fails. You still get the message to Calgar. But it also doesn't work at the end of the game because you don't really succeed in killing him. He's completely fine at the end of the boss fight, and he teleports you into a space with Calgar. And then after you've interact with the power device, once you flip it and you switch the experimental device, that is what kills him because it removes all the warp energy out of there, and the sheer release of it in the vicinity just completely obliterates his body. So you just have to survive his battle, get transported into his dimension, mess with the device, and then he's by virtue of the plot, he dies. Like, no one in the plot actually scales to Amora or his abilities, except for Amora.
What are you saying, that he's stronger than Calgar Mangler? Am I gonna have to get the belt?
He's he's got more powerful abilities than the physical strength that Calgar can output, or literally anyone on Titus's squad. Yeah, the fact that he has a greater Lord of Change with him should make that very clear. That guy is bigger than like the biggest tanks they have out there on the field. Also, for some reason, they felt the need to separate these into 3 different missions. I would like to point out that the Dawn's Descent is 1 mission, as much as they'd like to believe it's 3. Though it effectively is 3. Should have been separated into 1. Or it should have been separated into 3, but it was only registered as 1. So after they finish fighting this, they're going to get the message to Calgar and then just run away after the fact once they get the gunship, or at least retreat back with their Spartans in tow. There's not going to be any sort of chaos turning on each other. First of all, they don't know what chaos is. Second of all, even if they did, they wouldn't accuse each other of being traitors because they haven't done that. And unlike the Imperium, the UNSC is not extremely paranoid of people around them most of the time. Plus, Locke has already done the background checks on everyone in his squad. He knows what they're about. That's kind of his job before they go on missions. Then during Dawn's Descent, which is when you're set down there with a bunch of Space Marines and through jump packs and whatnot, you just kind of like, I think you do like a low orbit drop past the existing ships all the way to your, I believe, all the way to the enemy vessel at the end of the area, because you have to take care of the giant Stryker field like warp gate thing. Oh yes, now I remember. So during the beginning of Dawn's Descent, if I'm not mistaken, they actually convert the hang on. Yeah, they convert Louise's machine inside of a Necron tomb world, and they convert it into a device to basically they convert the experimental device, which is a pylon operating system for the Necron pylons, to lower the barrier between warp space and real space so that the Lords of Change and the rest of them could get through. And then you find out later that Imura is actually the one that manipulated Louise into doing this. So ultimately, like, nothing in this mission is going to stop, save for maybe like the Hell Brute and I guess the final boss is really going to stop Fireteam Osiris here, because all of these are just basic Space Marines in armor. They are not really that dangerous. I mean, I guess there is a dragon during one of the sections, but you can just kind of avoid the dragon by staying away from the area when he shoots his flames. The Hell Brute, which you run into right before you get to the end of the level, is basically just a dreadnought. So it's like a 4-ton sized like object, like a mechanized mech suit, and all you have to do is just avoid it while it throws its hammer and shoots its plasma guns. That shouldn't be too hard. It should be around the same strength, if not probably weaker, than the Carnifex, since you could just keep shooting its head in the capsule where it's located. Um, then you can take it out. So with enough plasma shots, maybe even some Forerunner weapons, some bolter weapons, they could definitely kill that thing pretty easily. And it's not like the Carnifex where it's like its durability is kind of like a bit layered unless you put like a plasma grenade inside of its mouth. It's just like you could just blow off their arms or destroy parts of their limbs pretty easily on the Hellbrutes. Plus, they don't have like a lot of the heat resistance of the Carnifex. That and the Carnifex just has like so much flesh to cover up its body from like kinetic rounds and damage. Then after this, Louise basically dies. The warp gate gets opened and the area floods with like warp energy everywhere, outside of like the little warp section. So the whole planet just essentially gets flooded, or most of the area on this part of the planet gets flooded with warp energy due to the Necron pylons being reversed in their direction and letting in more of the warp space. Now, for the sake of the scenario, I am obviously not giving them anything in the Space Marine's physiology. So whatever Space Marine's resistance is or mental stuff to the warp, they don't get that. However, they don't really need to. As I explained in the previous one and the previous Space Marine one, and I'll explain here, Spartans and, well, really just any person in Halo would not be affected by the side effects of the warp, because the warp causes side effects to you and your mind based on your soul. That being that your soul is made of ectoplasma. It directly produces those ectoplasmic effects into your mind. That's essentially what warp energy is. However, that would not work on you if your soul is made of completely different properties, aka not generic soul-based properties like that. Halo souls are not made of this. Halo souls are referred to as essences, and they are quantum constructs made out of like quantum energy, aka the fabric of like the universe. The closest thing that I could akin them to is like, I guess, a basic component of like Necron tech, or some of the Necron tech, because a lot of Necron tech in Warhammer is based on like the process of quantum mechanics and quantum entanglement, since they are the most scientifically advanced verse, or the scientifically advanced faction in the Warhammer verse. My bad. So it'd be different to talk about like the Necrons being able to make a process that could affect Halo souls, at least your standard ones, not the ones in the domain. But this isn't Necron tech we're talking about, at least not directly, because the Necron pylon isn't giving its properties to warp space. It just undid the barrier between warp space and real space, which allowed the warp to bleed in. So the warp is what's causing the effect, not the Necron technology. The Necron technology is just allowing the circumstances to happen. So since the warp hasn't demonstrated that it can affect those things, and the warp has also demonstrated that it's actually inferior to Necron tech, specifically to quantum, a lot of its quantum mechanics and quantum entanglement, and it's also inferior to like temporal manipulation of like the universe. There's no reason to assume it would affect a soul that has those properties, which in this case are the souls of the Halo characters. And if you can't affect their souls directly, then you cannot affect their mind, because that is where their souls are. That is where their minds are located. So the only way for a Chaos person with the warp to do this would be to directly approach their physical bodies and impute it into them, which is only going to happen if they attack them like directly. But they won't know that until after they unveil the warp gate and there are like no consequences happening to them. All the other Imperial Guardsmen, though, they're going to be suffering the effects of the warp pretty handily. Technically, Space Marines would also be suffering a massive amount of problems from the warp, because Space Marines can also suffer side effects from the warp. They usually do. They just have to push through it, even though it usually causes them great pain and terror. Spartans are going to be completely unaffected, though. Like I said, their soul is different. So really, they're just going to be fighting like the traitors through this entire mission. It'll just be a normal mission until they come into contact with more Space Marines, more Ultramarines, as they move through these various areas, killing traitors. And then they have to get to the second. They have to go across the gate, follow Acheron until they get to a second objective on the far side of the battlefield, and then they have to defend and raise the banner. I don't know if they would do that in this circumstance, but they'll still hold their position until Calgar shows up, because Calgar just comes flying off the gunship and just starts blasting away traitors like a one-man army that he is. Then after that, Calgar will basically tell them like they need to regroup and they need to find a way to deal with these pylons and deal with the warp issues on the planet. I believe one of the members of your squad proposes the idea to reverse the pylon based on what you see Louise do with it. We can assume the same thing would happen here, since all they had to do to propose this was to just watch Louise move the pylon, which you would have done when you went down there to meet Louise, as you see him do it with your own eyeballs. Not to mention, Tanaka could probably understand it, considering she can understand Forerunner tech, and she also understands how to work a basic gadget. So I think they'll probably just propose the same thing to Calgar and tell him, like, since those pylons look almost exactly the same, they probably have a device somewhere. At bare minimum, if they are indeed a pylon, they should have a control node or something nearby that we can mess with. Especially since they seem to be turning like a purple color instead of like the standard green. So I think they're just through basic assessments, they'll establish another force of tanks and brigades to send them closer into the battlefield to take those ports. In the actual missions, I believe half of them are taken in the side missions by the other squads. You take the other half. Then you just have to run into another Hellbrute. He'll be killed the same way. Well, pretty much the same way you killed the previous Hellbrute, just by tons and tons of headshots. You then run into another Hellbrute. Well, you run into a Hellbrute in one of the tunnels that you're in, but he gets killed by a Dreadnought immediately. So you just get escorted by a Dreadnought to the end of the mission, where you can activate that pylon. Then, by the time you're done with the pylons, you just have to charge into battle with Calgar against Imura. So, this is where I think the outcome of their scenario and whether they die depends largely on how you want to interpret Imura's selfish, spiteful need to hurt Calgar, because the reason the reason you have a boss fight with the final boss of the game is because he freezes all of he basically stops time for every single one of the Ultramarines on the battlefield except for Calgar and the four of you. And then he later explains he allowed you into his domain specifically so that he could kill what he assumed was Calgar's favorite sons. In this instance, Imura doesn't know who the hell you are. In fact, Imura is going to be quite confused as to how you're even here, because you're also not Ultramarines, so he doesn't really have any reason to spare you, other than maybe offering you up as a gift to the Chaos Gods. So I would offer and envision two possible outcomes for this, which is the Chaos Gods route, where he's just like, I find you to be very interesting based on the fact that I cannot sense any of your soul, but I want your technology. and I want everything you have to offer to be interesting as a sacrifice for the changer of ways. Um, then there's a second scenario where he just decides to try and stop time around you, and I guess this works on the Spartans depending on whether or not you think his warp magic would affect them, if it's directly affecting. This depends on how time stop from a chaos sorcerer works, because I don't actually have any direct examples of this in the lore. I assume it works like a normal time stop, but since it's also using the warp, it's possible it's just affecting the timeline of their direct soul. At which point, it would also be completely ineffective on Halo characters. So, depending on if it's a normal time stop using warp energy, which is unlikely, or if it's a time stop that's slightly different, is the difference between it not working at all and being completely ineffective. I don't know the answer, unfortunately, because no Thousand Suns ever use time stop. There's like one time stop feat in like a Horus Heresy novel, but it's used by like a random Neverborn for a completely different thing, and it's never explained how they did it. So I can only give you the hypotheticals and then simply say what would happen. I guess if they get time stopped, they're just stuck there forever until I guess Calgar either wins the battle while he's trapped in that room, or I don't know, Imura eventually decides to kill you all with the Lord of Change. Because the Lord of Change, regardless of whether you think like he's using warp energy or not, he is just the size of a giant building. I'm fairly certain if he slammed his feet down on top of you, especially at that size, and through like warp fire, enough warp energy, he could just crush their shields and then eventually just kill the Spartans. It wouldn't take him that much time, assuming he hit them multiple times in quick succession, which would be possible if they were frozen in time. So, if they're frozen in time, they probably die here. That would be like their first main life. And then after that, I mean, probably the same outcome would happen. If they don't get frozen, they would just go straight to the boss battle, which would result in them having to fight Imura, dodging his projectiles, dodging the Lords of Change, until eventually Imura decides to teleport them into the dimension where he sent Calgar, where you just keep fighting more traitors and more demons until you reach Calgar, and then you move forward into this existing section to get the
Wouldn't Calgar just kill them because he doesn't have any way to prove they're real?
Okay, yeah. So this is where I kind of have to point the question that Calgar asked Titus. It's like, hey, I don't know if you're. I need to see if you're a projection of chaos. So I think he asked them to remember the vow that he took at a specific battle, and then you repeat it to him, and he's like, okay, you're not a chaos thing. All right, we can keep going. But well, I don't. I don't entirely know if that would work here because they've never met Fireteam Osiris, so Calgar would probably just try to kill them
Okay,
or try to attack them.
so if well, could they kill Calgar, the four of them versus
They
Calgar in this
they
scenario?
they could kill him because Calgar unfortunately has suffered the same fault that every Ultramarine does. He doesn't wear a helmet.
Damn.
So yes, he technically has an iron halo, but like it's unidirectional. Let me explain.
Worst fucking
So
interpretation.
now I think personally they wouldn't kill Calgar. They just beat the shit out of him, and then they'd be like, "All right, it's time to stop fighting. We're not here to kill you. I don't care if you think we're chaos. We're gonna go activate that warp device. You can help us or not, or fuck off. I don't care."
Okay.
So Calgar would probably be like, "Yeah, I don't think chaos would do that. They're probably not chaos."
Except that's what
Um,
Chaos would want me to think.
it's a double plan behind another double plan. Yeah, they would just activate the pylon, and then after doing that, after the immense amount of pain that would cause, that would just destroy Imura's body, which would then just break the pylons, destroy the warp area and then or destroy the warp opening and portal, obliterate the Lord of Change, and then most of the demons would fade away. Traitor legions would have to retreat, and then the day is won. So I think the scenario of them winning depends entirely on like whether you think the time stop works on them. But that's entirely dependent on how you think the time stop works at all, or if you have a justification for it working a certain way. I technically do, but I don't have any examples of time stop working from chaos sorcerers or how they actually use the psychic energy to affect people's like souls in the time stop. Like I don't know what they're directly affecting, you know? So
Right.
I can't speak definitively on what the time stop does because it's not a normal time stop. It's a warp time stop. And it's
Understood.
also possible that. Well, go ahead.
No, no, I'm just saying, okay, it's a warp time stop. All right, understood, understood.
Yes, it's also possible that it. Well, I guess. No, no. Technically, it is a warp time stop. I was going to say it might be body control, but now that I think about it, like no, they make it clear it's a time stop. The warp is weird because any time you involve time based powers, most people will say like time doesn't really work with a warp, so it doesn't work off of conventional time. And while this is true, this is technically because the warp is like super unstable. It does have a timeline. It does have a flow of time. It's just the timeline is inconsistent. You can actually directly control the flow of time in the warp if you were to manipulate it directly. It's just that no one has time-based weaponry in Warhammer, save for like a very few species. But we do have examples of this happening in like Perturabo's novel, where someone shoots a time-based device or an entropic weapon into the warp, and it blows up a void shield. All the Space Marines are like, "Yeah, how did that happen? How did they put time in the warp? That doesn't make sense. They literally use the fabric of the universe to fight the warp. Time should have no meaning in the warp, and yet it does." So I don't know. That's just the best that I can give. If you think it doesn't work on them, then they win because just like the Space Marines in the scenario, all they have to do is dodge that guy's attacks for like a few minutes, and then he'll just send them to where Calgar is. Like I can't stress this enough. You never really kill Imura in a normal fight. You just dodge him for a while, and then he just gets fed up and sends you to Calgar, and then you activate the experimental device and kill him with the device.
All right.
It's a high it's a high boss fight, but it's just like weird from a power scaling standpoint. That's everything. I think it's the last one. I've talked enough. My voice is sore.
All right. Well,
I'm
oh, do you have anything else you want to add, Mingler?
no, I'm done.
You're done. You're done. Are you sure? Are you sure? Well, this
I'm fairly certain.
this video ended up being an hour 37 minutes, Mingler. Good job. Good job. But so, with that said, we'll go ahead and call it here. As far as I know, unless I'm mistaken, that will be the end of the protagonist swaps between the Space Marines and the Halo teams, I guess,
Yes.
for more or less. So if any other videos end up coming out between these two, or not between, but for these two groups, they will not be related to these Protect swaps since we finished them for now, unless fucking Space Marine 3 just randomly drops out fucking nowhere.
I'm not gonna be like it's not going to be a scripted scenario. It'll just be a versus scenario because this is also let me be clear. Like this is lore accurate to the extent that it favors the verse that it's in. So it's mostly Warhammer related because they're in a Warhammer verse. This is not like lore accurate for the stuff that like the Spartans can do. No more in the way that like what's it called?
The Space
No
Marines and
more than the way like Space Marines are in Halo Reach. It's like they don't get absolutely everything because of the fact that they're constrained to the statistics and they're dropped into an unfamiliar territory. So
so
it's a scripted story scenario.
so before we leave the stream or the video, um very quickly, would the scenario be easier if you did not reduce them or I guess change them to the Space Marines level of abilities?
Okay, it would for certain outcomes. Their speed would get a lot faster because the Spartans have speed feats of reacting to beam rifles, which are just particle beams,
Yep.
and sentinel beams, which puts them at relativistic to like speed of light speeds, potentially FTL,
Okay.
depending on how quickly they fast it. So that most of the Tyranids would basically be like statues when they're walking around. Like they wouldn't, and even if they're not, they would have so much time to react to them. They're never gonna get hit by them. So any of the deaths to Carnifexes probably wouldn't happen. They'd be more likely to die from falling infrastructure
All right.
than they would from a Tyranid. Any of the times when they're fighting Carnifexes and Lictors, they would probably be able to just punch their faces out because the Spartans can still punch out brutes and they can physically push hunters, as we see in Ghosts of Onyx when Will tackles a hunter. And hunters are just flat out stated in some of the guides to be 5 tons. Their shield alone weighs 2 tons. So if we go by that weight limit, he could literally punch a dreadnought and send it flying through the air. He could also punch a Carnifex. I know that doesn't seem like how Spartans are typically portrayed in the games, but that's because they don't actually give you the raw numbers of what the Spartans can do. Like what the games show you is not lore accurate. If we were actually lore accurate, the Spartans basically punch with the force of like the high ends of like large building level. And they can tank things that are like thousands of tons.
All right.
So most of the weapons wouldn't even really ever breach their shields, ever, save for zoanthropes and neuranthrope psychers, just because some of their abilities would have completely different properties and would have an unknown amount of potency. So I'm just giving them the benefit of the doubt. Most weapons would not do anything to their shields and would pretty much never hurt them. So yes, Sim, it would make it easier. I don't think it would change anything for the sorcerer at the end of the game because I still don't know how his time stop ability works. And it wouldn't
That's
change anything for the Lord of Change because he's the size of a skyscraper.
that's fair. I just wanted to clarify that or like just ask that in case anyone in the comments
Yeah.
had questions to ask. But all right.
Well,
So
people were curious about it in the previous protagonist swaps if it was lore accurate, and I think we answered those ones too. So it's only fair that we do it here.
all right. So with that said then we'll end this video here. Thank you guys for your time as always. Have a nice day. I'll see you guys on the next stream or video. Take care everybody.